What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Clap Your Hands podcast, brought to you by Odyssey Sports, brought to you by Sports Radio 94 WIP. And this pod is brought to you by what I know Kyle was rooting for, I was rooting for. We get a week off of games between that last win and the beginning of the Boston series. So how you doing, man? Excited to be back in Philly, I'm sure.
Listen, I texted a colleague on the beat yesterday that this is like the summer of George and Seinfeld, but for Sixers beat writers, where just
Yes.
everything broke so great for us, where even with Joel getting hurt, like obviously that's a big bummer and we'll get into the implications of all that. But for them to win that game 4, and I came home on Saturday night at like 9:30, I was off the train in Philadelphia, knowing that I had at least a week until the next game I was going to cover. Was just, you almost wanted to, if I was a religious man, I would have dropped to my knees and like, thank God. So it's been great.
What's crazy too is, and I do want to get to game 4. Obviously, like lots of stretches of that game, certainly for the first half, it looked like we would get a game 5 in Philadelphia, but they step up, they win that game, they end the series. They do something Boston and Milwaukee could not. They sweep their first round opponent, and they probably had, maybe not the toughest first round opponent, but they certainly, I think the Nets are better than the Hawks. So, we're definitely going to get into that. Maxey, Harden, the East in general. I mean, I feel like a lot has kind of changed over this past week in terms of Giannis's injury, Boston losing that game. But I think the most important thing to start with for this pod is absolutely Joel Embiid. Look, I mean, they win on Saturday. He's ruled out on Friday, and then more and more comes out. It's a knee sprain. The sports doctor guy I follow that does a lot of NFL injuries, but also NBA injuries, says it looks like it's an ACL sprain. Obviously, that is speculation. Don't want to get too much into the, that part of it, but it's not good. Would be, I guess, my initial reaction. So before I go more into what I think and, how fans should feel, Kyle, just kind of start us off. Like, where are you at with the Joel injury? What do you know? What do you think? And, how do you think fans should feel about this?
Yeah, so I'll take you through kind of the whole thing of what I heard and where we're at. So Doc essentially told us what triggered the MRI in the first place is that after game 3, he was dealing with some pretty immediate swelling, and then there was also pain in the back of the knee. So that triggered some concern that there's a potential meniscus issue going on, and I think that's where a lot of people's minds jumped when they heard all that. So they did the MRI. As far as I understand it, did not show structural damage. There was no deterioration in terms of things like the meniscus. This is strictly a sprain, from what I understand. And through the whole time, this news came down officially like Friday night. I know it was Friday night because I was actually in line for dinner in New York with other colleagues, and all of us,
how it goes. Yeah.
all of us were like, oh, we're going to have like an uneventful night in New York before the game tomorrow. And then just like you look at your phone and it's like, fuck, it's just everybody mad that we now have to work. But so we get that news then, and immediately it was kind of an optimistic bent on the injury that maybe he'll be back next week. Now, obviously at that time, they did not know whether the series was going to end versus Brooklyn. Didn't know who their opponent would be moving forward, even if they had gotten through it, all of that. And still the message is pretty similar. Like, I think there's, in so much as there can be optimism here where your best player is hurt in the playoffs once again, it does seem like this is not like a severe, he's going to be out several weeks sprain. Now, the trouble is, like, there's been a lot of reporting from Woj and Shams Charania and, other plugged in people saying optimism and he could be back for this, he could be back for that. Like, I want people to understand that all that is just like, it's hope. Like, it is informed hope to some degree, but it's, Joel's going to wake up today and tomorrow and Wednesday and the next day. And you can only just take it a day at a time. Like, nobody's recovery timeline is the same. And, some of this is going to come down to, he's probably not going to be fully healthy, just period, the rest of the way now, right? Like, it's going to be very difficult for him to get hurt. And then you're just 100% without any real rest time the rest of the way. And so a lot of this comes down to what is the degree of pain that Joel can tolerate and is willing to play with, and that the team will look at and say, this is not putting you at additional risk of like severe injury.
Right.
And where I think this season is maybe distinguished from seasons past is that I think you probably have to lean more toward the risk side, because the ramifications organizationally, if you just like, look, we can all sit here and say, well, if he's hurt and they lose that series and it's already a series I would have picked Boston to win in regardless, we can say like the rational side of your brain says, just run it back next year. They clearly were very good. They were unfortunate, but like after this many years of this with James Harden and all the whispers about Houston and potentially leaving, coach might not survive a second round exit, like all this stuff adds up to, if you're not going to make a push for it now, then like when are you going to? And so I think that's kind of the calculus that comes up here. It's like, and that really, it's like it's not all in Joel's hands. Certainly the organization has a say, but a lot of this is going to just come down to how much are you willing to redline it with a chance to maybe win the title this year.
So a lot of information there. I would say when I found out about the injury on Friday night, I was not out to dinner, so my night was not ruined from it. But emotionally, like I would actually say my initial reaction was, this feels like not a big deal. They're up 3-0. He's been getting beat up in this series. Maybe they're just saying, you know what? We'll take it super conservative with him, and we won't play him in game 4. So I was pretty feeling good about it all day Saturday. Obviously, they win the game. I fire off the Sixers are going to beat Boston tweet. So clearly I'm feeling myself and feeling optimistic. And then Doc says the 50-50 thing, or I think he said about 50% that he would play in game 1. So that was probably the first point where I got worried about it in terms of, I think you're probably similar in the way whenever we hear something in the media, we try to figure out why are they saying that? What's their goal, right? Like what made Doc decide that he wanted to basically say Joel is going to be 50% at the start of this series? And I don't know. So I'm curious what you thought of Doc's comment, and outside of what has already happened. I mean, I agree. He's not going to be 100% for the series, and we'll get into that for a second. But do you think he could actually miss time? Because Doc says a 50% thing. Somebody reported, I'm sorry, it wasn't a report. The sports doctor who does the NFL stuff said he thought, based off the video, Joel is probably going to miss a game or two. Again, just an opinion. But what are your thoughts on missing time? Like, do you think he's actually going to not play?
Again, this is all speculation because
100%. Yep.
I would say he won't miss more than a game unless it is worse than we're being told, which that's always possible. Like, I think, everyone wants to think, I think the reaction to the 50% thing, there's the people who are like doom and gloom, this is awful. Then there are a lot of people who are like, oh, they're just trying, it's a smoke screen, blah, blah, blah. It's like, man, like what is the value of a smoke screen here?
Yeah.
Like, if Joel plays in game 1, Boston will find out right away what he has and how hurt he is and how willing to test his limits he is. Like that smoke screen lasts for exactly like 3 minutes of the first game in the series. Mm-hmm. It's so irrelevant. I mean, maybe Doc and the organization are thinking that way. I don't see the value of it, and I don't think that it's something that you factor in here. So I would say there's probably more upside to them trying to make it seem like it's better than it is, to be like, oh, well, 50-50 when it really could be like, let's say it was like a 25% chance and actually he might not play until it's back in Philadelphia. Like there's more justification for that than to be like, oh, we don't know because you're going to play him in game 1 and that. Now, again, I think he probably misses 1 game at most. I just think if I'm trying to get inside his mind, as long as he is able to get on the floor, we've seen like Joel doesn't take long. Like, he hasn't actually missed a ton of time in the playoffs. The problem has more been he's been compromised when he's there, right? It's like he's at 60% or 70% or whatever it is. So like, I don't think that Joel is going to be in there saying, no, I can't give it a go. I think he's going to look at himself in the mirror and say, I need and want to be out there for my teammates. And then it becomes more of a question of, well, how much does this impact him whether that's on defense. Can he close out as hard against a team that is going to space the floor against them in Boston? Can he be as dominant and leverage his strength the same in the post when he's up against Al Horford, when he's dealing with doubles, so on and so forth? I'm not that concerned about him missing time. It just comes back to that same thing. Like, how good can he be? Because that is, we've talked about it a lot. That's the biggest determining factor in whether they have a chance in this series.
So, from my experience of covering NFL injuries, in terms of being in the building, talking to people, seeing the players, it's always, in my opinion, this time of the year, worse than they're letting on. Very rarely are they at the podium saying something and it's actually way better than what they're saying, right? I think that this time of the year, it's just always trying to paint it, because you put it perfectly. The reports, all that, that's optimism. That's hope, right? I think that when Doc came out there and said 50-50 or 50%, in his head, he probably might be thinking it's way less than that, but he doesn't want to paint a super negative picture at the podium. So I actually do think this injury is probably, serious. I don't know. We could debate the use of that word. I think the injury is worse than they're letting on, in my opinion. Now, whether or not he'll play in game one, I thought last year versus Miami showed kind of the tricky situation they're in, right? Because he was very compromised versus Miami. He had the hand injury, he had the face injury, but he comes out there and just his mere presence, they win games 3 and game 4, right? So I think that if you're Joel, this is a bit of a trickier situation. I didn't know the details of the face and the hand, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like those are situations where it wasn't going to get significantly worse by him being out there. The face was protected, the thumb is what it is. The knee, like that is different. I mean, he could, to your point, if they push him too hard, he could go out there and, God forbid, knock on wood, like seriously injure that thing. And then we're talking about the beginning of next season, like missing time, or we're talking about
not even the beginning of next season. That
like
could be like
season.
You miss the whole season.
Right.
If there's a devastating knee injury.
So on one hand, I say to myself, he's got to be out there. Like the mere presence, as we saw versus Miami, completely shifts things. On the other hand, this is the one, like the back, obviously, and, we don't want him to be hurt. Like as a human, physically, you want to make sure he's at his best. But in terms of just being an athlete and missing time, the knee is probably the worst possible place you could be dealing with an injury, because that could be really long. So it's going to be a tricky decision for them. Like, is 2 days going to be a major difference? If he doesn't play game 1, is he ready for game 2? How do they, to your point, weigh out what's the long-term ramifications if he were to play and really hurt himself? I also think him specifically is somebody that if he had a major knee injury that required major surgery, I'd be worried about him. He's a big dude, right? Like we've seen when he has time off, it takes time for him to get back to being 100%. So while I agree, Joel is going to want to be out there. And I think ultimately he will be out there. I think he will play game 1. But in a season where, especially the last month, everything seemed to be, going in the right direction, and he's going to win MVP, and it feels like everything's rolling their way, right? He has an outstanding game 1 and game 2. The 48 hours of the terrible game 3 where he kind of like pouted his way through the whole thing and almost got kicked out. And then now this injury, man, just from a Joel emotional perspective, from a fan perspective, it's really been a real kind of crash back down to earth from what it was prior to that.
So I want to get into the schedule of round 2 a little bit as part of this discussion. So last night, once Boston beat Atlanta, the NBA essentially sent out a release like, okay, these are the potential outcomes for it. So if the Celtics win in 5,
right,
this is what the outcome is. If it goes longer, this is what the second round will look like. So the major difference between the two series. So if the Celtics win in 5, that'll finish Tuesday night. First game is Saturday. Second game is next Monday. Then they have a 3-day break between games 2 and 3. If it goes 6 games or more, Boston, Atlanta, the series doesn't start until next Monday, but it is every other day up until game 7.
Right.
So
they would have
game 7, they have like a 2-day break. So if we're trying to game it out and say which one is better for Joel, I think in some ways you say, well, the longer upfront break to give him more time right now and the team more time to prepare, so on and so forth. That's probably the ideal one, especially because it means Atlanta pushed Boston a little harder. They had to play more games, all that stuff. But to play every other day is just brutal. Like, it's just brutal. And if you were to, like, if we sit here and say, let's live in a world where Joel misses game 1 regardless. He's only going to miss game 1, but he's going to miss game 1. If he misses game 1 in a series that starts Saturday, that means he comes back next Monday and then immediately has 3 days off before the next game. If he doesn't come back until game 2 of a series where it starts next week, that means he doesn't play until next Wednesday, but he's not getting another break after that. It's basically just balls to the wall, no recovery. It is what it is. And so I think there's, like, I could see it either way, like, in terms of what they might prefer. You might just say, we don't want to have this guy who's going to be, let's say optimistically, he's at like 90% to start that series.
And that feels optimistic for what it's.
It feels it's a knee, it's a lower body knee injury for a huge person
that was like, swelling and had pain.
Yeah. So that's optimistic. If you go in at 90% and then you don't get any kind of rest, like we saw him at the end of the regular season. Now, granted, they're playing back-to-backs and what have you, but toward the end of regular season, there are some nights where Joel just didn't really have it. He didn't have the same energy to dial it up and, go out there and impact the game. Does that happen in a series where it's every other day? So I could see it kind of both ways. I mean, really, if we really want to get into it, the best outcome is obviously the Hawks win the series in 7 games.
Yes, like, that would be, or it goes 7 or whatever.
Yeah, like that is still best. But I do think there is some downside risk with the more congested schedule. And I almost think it'd be better for Boston to just kind of kill this series off. You wait until Joel's back next Monday in game 2, and it's more of a soft entrance ramp for him.
So I was pretty torn on this as well, but now that I hear you break it down, I do think I actually side on rooting for Boston to end this in 5. And here's why. Because game 1, I think even if Joel was at 100%, was going to be very, very difficult to win. Like, first game in Boston just feels like a loss. Like, in my head, I picture this Saturday, 1:00, like just a loss, right? Is how I pictured it. But if you kind of say, you know what, we'll try our best in game 1, maybe we steal one, who knows? If you get Joel at a higher percentage, whatever you want to put it, for games 2 and 3, 2 is probably the game you're more likely to win anyway. And then 3, you're back in Philly and he has 3 days off before there. So I think if you're trying to avoid, a 2-0 hole or God forbid a 3-0 hole, I think you probably have the best chance of being up after 3 games if you do the April 29th, May 1st, May 5th thing, which is with Boston closing it in 5, because I think those give you the best shot to win games 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is all theoretical. We could.
Welcome to the playoffs. This is every little detail matters at this point.
I could show up at practice tomorrow, assuming they have it, and they say, "Oh, well, Joel was decapitated at practice today, and he will not be available for
for games 2." Yes,
for games 2 and 3 at minimum.
We're optimistic about game 5.
Yeah, you really never know. It's. You hear what you hear, and you do your best digging to get beyond, the team marching orders. But at some point, it's just like we're all just kind of in the dark here until the big guy decides he wants to say something.
So here would be one final Joel point I'll make, because I've been pretty firmly in the corner of, if they lose in round 2 to the Celtics, and at the Bucks at the time, and now we know it'll be the Celtics, that I wouldn't blow it up. Like, I'm not okay with it, but I understand a loss to the Celtics in the second round, and that wouldn't make me make major changes. I will say, if Joel is injured again and this impacts it, I wouldn't make major changes, because the only really major change would be to trade Joel, and they're not going to do that, nor should they do that, obviously. But of course, if this is how it ends, like Joel, limping up because he's hurt, limping up and down the court because he's hurt, missing game 1, missing, whatever, like game 4, who knows? It would be an extremely, extremely frustrating way for this season to end. I could handle a loss to the Celtics if it was at full strength and they played well. I'd emotionally accepted that. I was okay with it. After really kind of turning a corner on Joel and appreciating him for everything he can do, and recognizing he's currently, in my opinion, probably the best player in the NBA, man, oh man, it would lean me right back into that corner of, you can't win with a center if his body once again breaks down in the playoffs. I'm just being honest. Like if once again his body breaks down in the playoffs, I'll fight it. I'll try hard not to be, but I will be tempted to go back to the corner of, can you win with a guy that's this big as your best player? Now, I know Kawhi Leonard's missing time, right? Giannis is out. Like injuries happen. I'm just being honest about what my emotions would be on watching the season end because of a Joel injury.
Look, I get it. That's a natural reaction. And I do think it's been easy for between Doc and the players to take the stance of, well, there's no excuses and this and that because they're playing a Brooklyn team they knew they were going to beat.
Yeah.
We can say all these things about it was gritty, it was tough, they found a way, and so on and so forth. And that all sounds great. Like I've loved the messaging from Doc coming into and out of that game 4. It's like we've been in this position before. We find ways to win games. It doesn't matter if it's ugly. It doesn't matter if we have every star or no stars. Like a great example is Sacramento, who's tied 2-2 with the Golden State Warriors, the defending champions. They're the a high seed. They're the 3 seed in the West. And the Sixers beat them without James and without Joel on the road at the end of like a long West Coast road trip. Like this team has found ways. And that's to their tremendous credit for most of the season. But it's obviously a much different story against Boston. And I don't think they'll be as upbeat and as, oh, we're going to figure it out if Joel is either can't go or is not as good. They're going to come out of that series if they were to lose it and say, well, our best player was hurt. And then it's the excuse making thing again. And like, nobody wants to hear it. Like, I get it. I'm with you to some degree. Like if they were to lose in a tough 6 or 7 and Boston is just, that's a better team than them or a healthier team, whatever it is, at some point you just have to say they had home court and this is kind of the product of that. But if they go out meekly, if it's all the excuse making and, well, we never really got to see and blah, 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 then there is a reason that people have been hesitant to really go all in with this team all season. It's because of stuff like this. And because, frankly, who we haven't even gotten to yet, James Harden has been completely unable to finish at the rim in the playoffs so far.
Yes.
Like that, I think, honestly, might be what I'm watching this next series for more than the Joel stuff, right? I know that Joel is the MVP and the best player and so on and so forth, but like if James comes out and can't score in the paint the way he did the way he couldn't against Brooklyn, like how much money are you actually willing to give that guy going forward? And are you willing to just say he's walking out the door? Because if that's your guy, if he's the guy who you're going to have to offer him, I would guess the max. I think Houston is going to give him the max. If you don't, you're going to give a guy a 4 or 5 year max who can't score at the rim in the playoffs. Like, so sorry, that's a big problem.
Yeah. So let's transition to game 4 and we'll start with that. So game 4, obviously, like to the Harden thing, I go back and forth pretty viciously on the Harden thing because there is one side of me that says he is getting to the rim and he is making threes and he is like, I think he's been to a certain degree what you kind of hoped he would be overall in the season for sure. He creates a ton of offense. He makes Joel better. He makes threes at a high clip. And I think that he has been able to score for stretches when they've needed to. But there's no denying the not finishing at the rim thing is weird. I don't know if it's just like a hitter in baseball going on a cold streak because physically it doesn't, like, I don't see a physical reason he's not finishing at the rim unless you think he can't jump as high and he's so afraid of getting a shot block that it's like altering how he's shooting at the rim, which could be it. But I think physically he's looked fine getting there. It's just finishing there. So, I mean, from game 4, I guess you can talk about that a little bit too, but just more so, I mean, why do you think he's missing? Has he talked about it? Has he been asked about it? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a combination of things. He said after game 4, it's like, they didn't do anything. It's one of those things. You just miss shots, whatever. But
right.
I don't see a guy now. Game 3, I will say, I saw him go up strong to the basket, and pretty noteworthy that was the game that he actually looked good and finished at the rim. Mm-hmm. A lot of these misses that he has are him settling for these like 10-foot push shots, runners, floaters. And look, he can make those from time to time, but he's not Trae Young, where the runner is like such a gigantic and important part of his
Trae
arsenal.
Young, by the way, man, he sucks. Like, I've been watching some of that. He is like, I was so fooled by him. Anyway, that's just a quick side, but watching this Boston Atlanta series, he is such a losing player. But go ahead.
Well, I feel like I've said on this podcast, there's a difference between being a bad defensive player and being maybe the single worst defensive player in
Oh,
the
it's
NBA.
unbelievable. Yeah.
So the story for another day. Anyway, so with Harden, the reliance on these runners and floaters has been bad. And some of it must be either he lacks the vertical explosion to get to the rim as quick as he needs to, or which is arguably just as bad, he doesn't trust his body that he can get there. Like the mental hangups from the hamstring issues in the past, that he's not willing to explode the way he might have used to. And so that's that's essentially like you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, where I think his burst on the perimeter has been pretty good. Like he was beating Nick Claxton and Mikal Bridges, like very good defensive players.
And long
defenders.
Yeah.
And then essentially conceding the advantage that he gained. Like there was a play in the second quarter of game 4, I believe, where he smoked Nick Claxton and then just like stopped. And it was, I don't know if it's because he's trying too hard to draw fouls, which that in itself is a problem, or he didn't trust that he was going to get to the basket. But either way, those are both bad outcomes or bad things for the Sixers. So I don't feel great about him coming into this series. I certainly feel worse about him than I did coming into the playoffs in general. And I wish that we had gotten the full game 3 of him, because that felt like it was like, all right, he's finally in a groove.
Yeah.
He's doing what they need him to do. He's essentially picking up Joel and filling that role that he needs to as the co-star. And then he has an opportunity to be kind of the guy in game 4. And it's like, oh my God, this guy can't make absolutely anything inside the arc. It's crazy.
Well, and the concerning thing too is coming off of the Joel discussion we just had, game 1, Boston on the road, very hard game. I don't think Harden has to go out and win it for you to prove that he's worth it. But that's the game that you get James for, right? That you have a legit number 2. Like if you're Boston and you're missing Tatum, you feel good that you have Brown. If you're Phoenix and you're missing Durant, you have Booker. And I understand James is not on the level of Booker at this point in his career, but these are the games where you say, okay, this is why we can make the argument we have one of the best duos in the NBA, because if we're missing one, we have someone else to go to. So, I mean, we'll do more about game 1 later in the week on more pods, but yeah, it'll be a big chance for Harden to step up and kind of, again, like show he's worth the max, show they should re-sign him. I think you probably have to re-sign him either way is my big picture take without getting into too much. But yeah, it'll be a big game for him. The other game 4 takeaway, if Harden's not going to be able to score and Embiid's not going to be there, you're going to need Maxey to just completely go off, right? To get over 30 points, to be, averaging 26, 27 points if Harden's not going to score and Embiid's not going to be 100%. Game 4, steps up in the second half. I've been so impressed with how he's handled himself in crunch time. And it really has made me view game 3 differently in a way, because after game 3, when we did the pod, I was very much in the camp of, man, Joel, what a disappointing performance. That's my main takeaway. But then when you see them win game 3 and game 4, it does, and it's something you've been saying all season, the way this team can manufacture wins, it stands out. Like those game 3 and game 4 are 2 games they would have lost in the playoffs in past years, in my opinion. So, and I think one of the reasons they didn't is because of Maxey. So what did you see from Maxey in game 4? And just moving forward, how do you feel about him maybe having to take his game up another level with a likely hobbled Embiid and maybe not the best version of Harden around the rim?
Well, I didn't think Maxey was very good, but in game 4, at least game 3, he obviously was awesome. But game 4, he shot about as poorly as Harden did. The difference between them and what I appreciated from Tyrese is that compared to James, who did a lot of that, like, stop short of the rim and putting up these floaters, Tyrese is pushing the pace, trying to get to the rim. And his bigger problem was just aggression. Like he's thinking, I'm going to score through 3 guys instead of pulling it out and, trying to run something in the half court. I did think you saw some of his limitations when a defense plans for him more than they plan for Joel Embiid. Like when Joel's on the floor, it's everything is put out there to stop Joel, and Maxey can kind of slip between the cracks a little bit and be that off-ball secondary scorer. So that was a concern. I mean, the big hero of Game 4 to me was Tobias Harris,
Yep.
and it was a reminder that this guy he's got a multifaceted skill set that they could tap into it more, but they don't, mostly because they have better options. But in these scenarios where, Joel's out and they need to call on somebody, like that's a guy you're going to have to run offense for. And, Doc said actually after the game that he thought Tobias was hunting his shot a little too much early in that game. But I disagree with him. Like, I want to see on a night that Joel is out of the game or if James is not available, that's one of your best players. Like, you have to get him the ball and try to get him going early, because you saw it in that game. Once he got into a rhythm, they couldn't really do anything against him in the mid post. Like, yes, he had some possessions where he kind of just ran guys over who were smaller than him, which I love seeing that. That's the type of Tobias that you'd like to see, that level of physicality even more. But even when they play good defense against him, he's just shooting over people. And like, he has that in his game that he can use that. Now it'll be tougher against the Boston team, especially, if Joel's not there and he gets more attention. It's just, they have better guys. They're better with sending help defense at bad times to turn you over. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take Tobias Harris having a big game. It's going to take Paul Reed having, 15 rebounds or 8 offensive rebounds alone. Like, he was awesome. It's going to take PJ Tucker making those, like, I'm the one guy inside 3 different opposing players group, and I'm still coming up with the rebound. DeAnthony Melton stepping up, Jalen McDaniel stepping up. Like, I tweeted this, I think, during Game 4. The thing that's really striking to me about this team compared to seasons past, like, they just have so many guys that even if they're struggling, they're not playing well, they're just like hardworking, athletic guys who will just go and make a play, like a putback dunk, an offensive rebound, dive to hit the floor for a loose ball. Like, they've had a lot of specialists in the past and not a lot of guys who are just, this is a two-way guy who's going to figure out a way to make a play. And I think that, even though they're much better than Brooklyn and probably win that series regardless, I just think you saw the impact of all the moves they've made since, last July or whatever to improve this team.
I think in a way, with the way the series played out, games 1 and game 2, Joel is doing his whole, better version of Nikola Jokic, just passing it, doing the whole thing he does, right? And then games 3 and 4, it's different people. Maxey steps up. But I think looking back at the series as a whole, you could probably say the people that deserve the most credit are Doc and Daryl Morey, just in terms of Doc winning those games without Joel. I mean, one game basically without him, and then obviously the fourth one without him. You've written about this, how his ability to win when he doesn't have his star players is impressive. And then, yes, they were going to beat the Nets no matter what. They are a better team. But I also think that the differences between this team now and when Daryl Morey took over were very much on display against the Nets, right? Like, they're deeper. They have better shooters. I think, you mentioned like the addition of PJ Tucker. I think Melton also fits that role of like a try-hard guy. So I thought that those two in particular had a good series. We've debated this, or discussed it on the pod, I should say, about the moves Daryl has made, how much of an impact has he made, those type of things. It really kind of all came together. And, you can kind of say with Paul Reed too, like Doc was willing to play Paul Reed. We can do the whole in the regular season, should he have played him more, like early on, whatever, blah, blah. Bottom line is he is doing what everybody wanted, which is he might have gotten there a weird way. He has Paul Reed playing his best basketball at the end of the season in the playoffs, and he's playing them. And that's all people wanted.
Well, and just to bring in the last guy essentially in the rotation, like Jalen McDaniels, who they trade Matisse Thybulle for him. There's obviously like a Thybulle truther section of this fan base who is always like, he's getting better from 3 and blah, blah, blah. And like, obviously had a defensive impact. Jalen McDaniels scored 4 points in that game 4. There are 4 points that Matisse Thybulle has not scored in his entire career. There are plays where it's toward the end of the shot clock, ball comes to Jalen, And it's just you got to figure something out. You got to beat somebody off the dribble. You got to use a step through move to get by somebody and score. And those are like 4 points is 4 points, but like those type of things add up from all your role players. Like you're not going to ask whether it was Thibault, McDaniels, whoever you could have traded them for. You're not going to ask them to have a huge scoring role on this team. Like you're just not. But the fact that you can say to him or ask him, look, Jalen, you're out there to space the floor and play defense and do all this. But if the chips are down and it comes your way, we trust you to go make a play. The more of those guys you have in the playoffs, the harder it becomes to beat you. Like you're just a more foolproof team at all times. And I think like it might be a small move. I don't even know you could call it an upgrade based on, the defensive upside is higher with Thibault. I get all that, but like those are big moments within games like that. And those I think will matter as we get deeper into the playoffs.
Well, and especially I remember at the trade deadline doing the pod, and there was definitely a sense among the fan base of nothing was done, right? Their only goal was to get under the tax. And I do think McDaniels is an upgrade over Thibault, but regardless, it certainly turned into a move that's having somewhat of an impact, at least early on in this. So the last kind of big picture point I want to talk about, it would feel wrong not to talk about Paul Reed. So one of the reasons I've enjoyed doing this podcast with you is you'll say something on a Wednesday, and then on Thursday's game, I notice it. So you've been like, Miss Cleo with the predictions, but hopefully not from the scam artist part of that Netflix.
Yeah, no. All real over here.
Yeah, which is wild. But so you brought something up. It was your last part of the pod before how, we think of Paul Reed as this just like athletic, try hard, like rumbling all around type of guy. But his touch around the rim is actually really impressive.
Really good.
Yeah, and I've noticed that a ton ever since you brought it up. Just watching him in game 4, obviously he steps up, has to start. Doc started him. Props to Doc. But like, I just think what we're watching with him is a player that is definitely going from someone that we can talk about, being a backup, playing 8 minutes in the playoffs, to someone that I just love Jalen Hurts press conference. He's not going to get Jalen Hurts money, but he might get like AJ Brown money, like if he keeps playing this well, right? Like so I just think watching him evolve, watching the touch around the rim, watching him make himself some money. I mean, he's an incredibly impressive player for the role he's asked to play.
So you brought up Doc earlier. I want to stick on him for a second. To me, the important thing is not that Doc started Paul Reed. It's that after Paul Reed had a bad first half, Doc said, I still trust you and you're going to play. And, we can talk about a lot of factors in player development, but one thing that is abundantly clear is being empowered and feeling confident that like, I can make a mistake. I can go out there and I might miss an assignment. There might be a miscommunication. I might miss a couple shots, but the coach is not going to say immediately, get that motherfucker off the floor. Like it's a lot of, okay, you dealt with the tough stretch. You didn't play well, but you've shown us enough. You've worked hard enough. You've done enough for this team and this group that we are going to give you the benefit of the doubt and go out there. And I think that honestly is the biggest thing with Paul. Like he has always been this super try hard, offensive rebounding, just long athletic guy, but he didn't have the rope that he does now. Like there just was not enough, or there wasn't enough patience for him to become a better player. And, you could see that there was a lot of uncertainty. And now you see a guy that's gotten plenty of minutes, that's continued to play hard. And look, like I've said this in several different formats at this point. The number one reason to play Paul Reed is that he plays harder than anybody else on the team. And when that guy comes in and sets that sort of tone, it brings up everybody. It forces everybody else on the floor with him, whether that's Melton, who already plays hard, whether that's McDaniels, who already plays hard, George Niang, who like I make fun of his defense, but he had some decent defensive moments in that playoff series. Like Paul Reed playing that hard helps to lift up everybody else on the team just by setting an example for everybody else. And he actually said, and this is also to his tremendous credit on top of the finishing stuff, Paul Reed said that part of the reason that he accepts being coached hard by the coaching staff is that he wants to set an example for the rest of the team that like, he does something wrong, he's willing to say, he'll put his hand up and say, yeah, coach, I was wrong, because he wants the other guys, including the star players on the team, to see that and feel that and know that, like, it's okay to be wrong or make a mistake and then
Yeah.
just go out there and fix it. And so to have the self-awareness to say that and to think that and to carry yourself that way, that's a really important thing for a young role player to pick up on. So, I know that I've said 100 times, like, the numbers have not been great for him on the floor over the course of the season, but I think it's undeniable that this guy has developed in a positive way for them. And I think he has more than earned his right to be, an
Mhm.
important part of the rotation in the playoffs.
One of the things I always think is really interesting in sports is how, like, once a narrative is made, how hard it is to break that narrative. And I think with Paul Reed, the narrative has always been they're not playing him enough, they're not developing him well, he needs to be in there more, blah, blah, blah. I'm curious, and I don't know the answer to this or really have a strong opinion one way or the other. Do you think now that we're seeing this version of Paul Reed when they need him most, and look, it's the Nets, we'll see against Boston, whatever. Do you think they've handled this right? Like, if they play him more minutes last year, do you think he's already this player? Do you think his development just took this long and this is how long it was going to take for him to always be this player?
It's one of those things that's kind of impossible to say. Like, at a minimum, I think I would have never signed Montrezl Harrell, for example.
Right.
And I would have said, Paul Reed, this is your job this year. We're going to let you play the whole year. And, Paul finally gets his real chance in, I want to say it was like late January, early February of this year, to be the guy. And that ended up being enough time. So maybe if you play him in November, December, most of January, he's even further ahead than he is right now. And we could say that, but clearly, like, he has not, I don't think he's suffered from not playing. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like he has a good attitude and a good approach to the situation. You can see a difference in how, Doc has talked about him and how the team treats him. Like, beginning of the season, it wasn't just the coaching staff. You could see he fought like George Niang for a couple of rebounds that they ended up losing as a team, and George chewed him out. There are a lot of moments where James Harden is yelling at him because he's not setting the screen that he wants, or he's not rolling correctly, or whatever it is. So it's not been like Doc just says this guy can't play. He's had to gain the trust of his teammates. And I think that has been a huge part of his ascension here. And it's been part of, not the whole reason, but part of why Doc's been more willing to trust him. And that's been a big development for them.
I think about it sometimes a little bit, like rookie quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm a big proponent of just play them. Like, just put them out there and play them. You learn your best by being out there, all those things. But the other school of thought is, if you put a guy out there for big minutes or big responsibilities before he's not ready, then you can wreck his confidence as well. And to your point about us not knowing the answer, we're not in those meetings. We're not in Paul Reed's head. We're not in, knowing what he knows. But yeah, I mean, maybe if they play him big minutes early, he's not ready. He, to your point about earning the trust of his teammates, maybe it gets to a point where he can't do it, right? Like, it just snowballs and it's an ugly situation. But no matter how it played out, clearly he's been awesome. And he was a huge part of the reason they were able to win game 4. So before we wrap this up, and we're going to do a lot of Boston talk, obviously, this week, but I do want to get your initial just kind of thought. You can make a prediction. You're welcome to change if you want. You cannot. Just curious, with the Joel stuff, with everything, just where are you at with Boston?
Well, I would have picked Boston to win regardless, because I think home court is that valuable. And I think Boston has just had their number. The Joel thing makes me think, like, man, this could get ugly potentially if Joel's not right. Now, this team has surprised all year in backs against the wall situations. And, it's not like, other than, I think, the opening game of the season, which was an entire lifetime ago. I don't know how much stock I put into that. Other than that one, all the games have been fairly close. And you could sit there and say, even the games they lose, it's not like Boston clearly outclassed them. I just think, and we go back to the years past, it's like, this is a franchise that has had their number for quite a while. And the main guys are still the main guys there. And so all that on top of the home court, on top of Joel being hurt, it's like, not feeling great about this series. Now, if they are somehow able to come out of it, this thing is wide open. Like, I think we've seen that with between injuries elsewhere, underperformances elsewhere, whatever it is. There is no just unstoppable force in the NBA right now. We'll see what the Bucks look like with Giannis looking like he's about to return, but nobody out there is like, man, that's the apex predator that they just can't beat. So I think if they can win this series, then I think they might win the title, but I just don't think they're winning this series.
Yeah, so I tweeted out when the Giannis injury happened that Sixers Celtics is the NBA Finals, and everyone's in my mentions like, that's not physically possible. It's like, yeah, we get it. I know. What I'm saying is, to your point, like, yes, I think if they can win this series, they will win the title. And I look, I think they are going to win the series still. Maybe that's blind optimism. Maybe that's blind, like, I've doubted them all along and been wrong, and they'll prove me wrong again. The Joel thing is worrisome for sure. I mean, like, the whole kind of reason I picked them initially, but also just my optimism about them throughout has been what you said. This is the year. Like, this is a year where it feels like he's ready to be that guy. And it's just such a buzzkill if he's not gonna be able to do it. So we'll know more about Joel hopefully throughout the week. I mean, there'll be practices. Maybe you'll get more information. I'm sure there'll be more leaked reports, those type of things. So by the time game one rolls around, we'll have a better feel. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm choosing blind optimism. Maybe that's not the best path to go, but with everything that they've done this year, I still have some hope they'll do it. So until then, we will definitely be back with more episodes this week, talk more about the series, get more into the matchups. As I joked earlier, Kyle absolutely nailed the Nets series in terms of what to look for. So I look forward to hearing from him what I should look for against Boston. And, we'll keep our fingers all crossed all week for Joel. So, Kyle, I'll talk to you next time. And thanks again, everybody, for listening.
Talk to you guys soon.